doing that? I love Michael. I have to confess, when I first came to Chapel Place, I thought for sure this kid was going to leave. I thought for sure this kid was going to give up and not do it. And I'm so glad that God has proven me horribly wrong, because now you're a great man of God, and I'm very encouraged by you. So I thank God for you and all that you're doing. And by the way, Nikki's mother is a saint and father too. Like, you guys are, yes. Thank you for raising him and being so patient, because you're a testimony to, and your brother. Yes. Thank you all, your whole family. Okay.
So hi. Turn with me to your Bibles this morning. Growing up, I grew up in a house. Sorry, I grew up in a house that was faithful to the Lord, and so I knew about God, but I did not know God personally. One thing about me was that I was always, and I still am, super self-conscious, and even to a point maniacally obsessed about maintaining my best possible image. I was so focused on looking good and impressing people that I was literally a slave to people's approval. That meant I lived to please my peers, which has also always been my church friends and my school friends. I hated that God existed. I couldn't deny it, and so for the long time, I just cognitive dissonance. I denied it altogether. So I get whatever. A foolish and maybe even a closeted atheist, I maintained this good Christian image, nevertheless. I hated this good Christian image, though. I hated it a lot because I needed absolute freedom. Surely you didn't miss the irony where enslavement to what people thought of me was to me liberty. I knew deep down that God existed, but I lived as though he didn't. I swore like a sailor, and I had absolutely filthy speech. That's just terrible. And I only did things, and I was only befriending people who would directly benefit me. I was manipulative, and just a downright evil and bad person altogether. And at home and at church, I put on this Christian facade to be held in high esteem among my church peers and to not disappoint my parents. Sorry, Mom and Dad. However, it wasn't until God used these, the aforementioned church peers, in helping me to read the scriptures after I saw their passion for God. I knew that there was something lacking in my life after seeing their fulfillment in God. And it wasn't until I recognized the true beauty of the cross and of the gospel and the ultimate price that Christ had paid for me. It was at this point that Jesus, he stopped knocking at my door, and instead it was more like a SWAT team kicked the door down and came in, right? And I could no longer hide from him. I couldn't. Now, I live knowing it's not about me. Subsequent to my coming to faith, life has been harder. I get ridiculed for my faith at school, but it's whatever. He has changed my life eternally and entirely. By him, I produce fruit, and by him only. And this has led me to the conclusion that God's people act like God's people. People who are in Christ act like Christ, or at least strive to be. Maybe not perfectly, but nevertheless they do. At first, I didn't want to share my testimony because it's boring. I didn't have a near-death experience or anything like that. But ultimately, I know that my testimony, believe it or not, has very little to do with me. It's about Christ's redemptive work and what he has done in my life. I just want to share this verse in Galatians 2:20. My Bible's on my chair, so I have to pull it up on my phone. I'm sorry. I know you have no phones allowed during service policy, but I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Thank you.